June 23rd, 2018, there was a group of about 12 young people, age 11 to 16. They had just played a soccer match. It was one of the boys' birthdays. And so they decided to celebrate this birthday by going into this particular cave. So you can just picture boys biking over to the cave. They've got cake, they've got gifts, they've got all kinds of things. They get towards the middle of the cave and monsoon rain started, to the point where water started growing in the cave. Some of the boys didn't know how to swim, and they realized the seriousness of the situation. They abandoned the gifts, the cake, and they went towards the back of the cave to a place called Pattaya Beach. It was a place that they knew was higher in elevation. And there they waited. Not 100% sure that anyone even knew they were there. In fact, had their bicycles not been parked out front, nobody would have known they were there. It was over a week later before there was any contact at all. And I want you to think very, very seriously about that. Imagine for just a moment, during that first 24 hours, they still had light. But after 24 hours, the lights went out. They had they stuck some snacks and some food in their pocket. But again, after 24 hours, it was gone. And so they waited. It would be 9 days later before they finally saw 2 Navy SEAL divers coming up out of the water. Can you imagine for just a moment what that light represented to them? The amount of hope that it would give you if you had been stuck in complete blackness, and now finally you see people who you think they could rescue us. Here's what I want to do. I want to leave those boys in the cave for a little while. And I want you and I to walk out, and I want us to look around at our culture today. Because we need to be very honest and realize it's dark out there today. And they need the light desperately. How dark is it? May 2021, a cereal company decided to jump into the pronoun arena, encouraging kids to choose their pronoun, basically promoting transgender diversity. When I was a kid, I had 2 brothers, very, very mean older brothers. And we would fight for the toy that was in the bottom of cereal boxes. Some of you are old enough to remember they would put little toys in there. We were supposed to wait until the toy fell out into whoever's bowl. My mean brothers would stick their dirty hands and arms down in the bottom and pull it out. Never did I think we would reach a point where cereal boxes are jumping into the fray. Or how about kids' cartoons? Blue's Clues. Now, I met these young folks just a few moments ago, and they are taking notes, which I love, by the way. But I am going to ask them, have you guys ever seen Blue's Clues? This particular show, just this last year, not only had a gay parade, they had a transgender parade marshal for that particular show. Or how about Disney, Pixar, who's joined in and is now not so covertly inserting transgender, homosexual characters throughout most of their works. Over and over, what we're seeing is attacks on the Christian family. You've got the transgender agenda. You've got sexual immorality. I show you this not because I want you to go there. I show you that this is a website that is offering a service for married people to commit adultery. Notice their tagline: life is short, have an affair. Now, what really should be shocking, they've got over 57 million members who've signed up for this service. We've got radical feminism that is trying to break up the home. We've got LGBTQ activists that are absolutely decimating the institution of marriage. We've got racism that is dividing our country, which, by the way, Jesus prayed for not division, but for unity. We've got hostile atheism, as we talked about last night. All of this is what the next generation is growing up with. We need to be awake. We need to realize that the America we look around and see today is totally different than what it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. Some of you recognize the name James Dobson. He wrote a book called Children at Risk many years ago. In that book, he said this: nothing short of a great civil war of values rages today throughout North America. He said two sides with vastly differing and incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society. He's right. There is a massive battle going on. You look out and you see things, even like a kid's show called Sesame Street that some of you grew up in, that is now promoting the idea of same-sex marriage. You got the state of California, where they recently submitted a bill that would make pedophilia not a crime, but a sexual orientation. Now, folks, think about that for just a moment. One of the areas that I focus a lot of studies on is trying to get my finger on the pulse of our country, our culture. If they allow this, here's what that means. That means they can drive school buses, work in daycare centers, teach in the classroom. Or what about Facebook? Many of you in this room probably have Facebook pages. Are you aware that Facebook is trying to tell our young people there are 59 different genders? That's more flavors of ice cream than Baskin Robbins. I know this is going to surprise some of you in the room. But when I was born, my parents knew my gender that day. And it hasn't changed. And what's ironic to me is you see a lot of times T-shirts that are promoting this idea that there's all these different genders. And then you go to select which size you want. Not that I'm buying those T-shirts, but you go to select it and it always says the same thing. Do you want a male shirt or a female shirt? And I'm thinking, something doesn't compute. You've got drag queen story hours that are being done quite literally across the country, where men are dressing up as women. They're going in, they are teaching young people. In fact, on one particular occasion, one of them said this: kids are able to see people who defy rigid gender restrictions. In other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to desensitize and make them tolerant. Please understand, all of this is starting very early in their lives. About 20 years ago, I put together material on whether or not there was a gay gene, because our culture is kind of really promoting this idea that it's genetic. Let me go ahead and give you the short version. We've actually looked at the whole human genome, and guess what we haven't found? There's not a gay gene. And I can prove it to you very easily. Identical twins actually come from a fertilized embryo that splits in the womb into two individuals with the same genetic information. If this were genetic, and this person were homosexual, what would this person have to be? And yet they're not. When I put that material together about 20 years ago, I was blown away at how many books had already been published, not for people our age, but for toddlers, promoting the idea of same-sex marriage. Daddy's roommate. What could be better than having two mommies? All these different things. Well, then a few short years ago, I came back and I revisited because I realized once you open the door to same-sex marriage, lots of other things are going to follow. Transgenderism. And I started realizing they've already got books for toddlers in this area. And not just like one or two, they've got quite literally dozens of them. If you don't think that this is changing the worldview of young people today, by the way, most every single book that I'm showing you has already been sent free of charge to every public elementary school library in the United States of America. And it doesn't just stop with toddlers. They also are promoting this among our teens as well. Please understand, they're not really worried about the adults and your views, because it's kind of like Hitler said, if they can get the children, they've got the next generation. And so that's where they're focusing their attention. I honestly believe that right now in America, Satan's winning the battle. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that with any joy. But I fear that in America, the church may end up being a remnant. In fact, I know we're already receiving missionaries from other countries. If you've got a Bible, go ahead and open it up, 2 Timothy chapter 3. Let's get started. 2 Timothy chapter 3, let me paint the picture for you. Paul is in a dark, dank Roman prison. He knows that his life has come just about to the end. He's writing one of the very last letters that he will write. He's writing it to somebody he has served as a mentor towards, somebody that he has trained up, somebody he loves. And he tells Timothy this, but know this, in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Yeah, as you look through that list right there, some of that looks like the evening news. You're talking about people who don't have self-control, people who love pleasure rather than God, people who despise good. And that's where we are today. Add to that what the younger generation is currently wrestling with, and that is the topic of social media. And let me just go ahead and say this. As a family, as the church family, this is one of those things we have to talk about because most of our kids are steeped in it. And they need to know what is a Christian's response to social media. Right now, we know that increased social media causes things like depression, anxiety, feelings of social isolation. You say, Brad, why would it do that? I mean, surely everything is wonderful, right? I haven't posted any pictures. Well, I'll take that back. I posted a single picture of our time here in Hawaii. And I've actually kind of refrained from that for a reason. Because I know a lot of times when people look at things like that, They think, oh man, his life is wonderful. And they don't see the side where we're pulling 20,000 suitcases through an airport, trying to cram them into 2 vans. No, what they see is the cute beach picture that took 37 tries to get. And they think, oh, I wish my life was like that. And so what happens? We've got young people who are comparing themselves to a virtual world that really doesn't exist. And as a result, suicide is up even more. You remember last night I told you it was up 253%. The rate is actually increasing exponentially now due to social media. So follow me for just a moment. We are the most connected society in the world. And yet we're one of the most isolated, depressed, and suicide is on the increase, even in Christian homes. Add to that the insanity that is taking place. I was talking with somebody last night about how could we have that many atheist professors in colleges? And I pointed out, I said, brother, it's gotten so bad that Harvard actually last year hired an atheist as their head chaplain. Harvard, by the way, that was started to train preachers. And yet now they've got an atheist. Folks, that's like letting the fox run the hen house. What did the psalmist say? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. Please understand, when you cast off your moral anchor that should be anchored in God, you're going to start seeing craziness. Flip back to Romans chapter 1. We touched on this last night, but I want to revisit. Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 28. Paul said, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliceness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. He says they're whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteousness of judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but they approve of those who practice them. Paul's saying here, there's some of you that maybe aren't doing this stuff, but you're approving of those who do. And so as we walk out of the cave, and as we look around at the darkness around us, we start seeing things like governments who are lowering the age of consent for one reason. Or we see, for instance, toy companies that are pushing not Barbie and Ken dolls, but rather gender neutral dolls. Folks, let me make sure you understand. This is an all-out assault on male leadership in the home. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to make everybody gender neutral. Now, let me make sure you understand. We are all equal in the sight of God when it comes to salvation. Amen? But God did make males and females differently. And he gave us different roles. And as much as you may not like to hear me say this, if I'm caught in a house fire and somebody has to come rescue me, I would much rather have a 200-pound Lima coming after me than a 100-pound, 5-foot female. Because I know Lima can throw me over his shoulder and carry me down the steps. And yet over and over again, what we're seeing is this idea, this push that gender is fluid. In the year 2018, there was a 4,000% increase in children identifying as transgender. 4,000. Now, if that doesn't wake you up, this next slide better. In the year 2007, there was a single clinic in the United States that was performing sexual reassignment surgery on minors, that is, children under 16. We're now hitting 50. That, my friends, is evil. It's child abuse. Because there's some of you in this room, maybe some of you ladies who, when you were 12 years old, maybe you like to climb trees, and people would call you a tomboy. Today, they would encourage you to go ahead and start taking hormone supplements and consider surgery, radical surgeries. Here's what they're teaching our kids. They're telling them that, yes, sex is given at birth, but gender comes from up here. Your gender identity, they say, is basically whatever you feel in your mind. Anybody think that there could be some problems with that? Yeah. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to discern the truth. We need to get back to, okay, what is real versus what are these subjective feelings? Because oftentimes what we find is they're wanting to go with subjective feelings and disregard the truth. Let me say right up front, as we discuss this whole gender confusion problem, I'm examining this issue unapologetically from a biblical worldview. Because again, God's word is the truth. John 17:17. Sanctify them by the truth. Thy word is truth. So if you've got a Bible, let's look at a couple of things we can learn from God's word about gender confusion. Number one, God is described in the Bible as our maker. Okay? I hate to break it to you. You didn't evolve from sludge. Okay? God actually created males and females. In fact, in the Bible, 7 times it uses the word creator as a description. 18 times he's described as our maker. So for instance, Psalm chapter 95, verse 6, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our maker. So point one, God is described as our maker. Point number two, that maker created males and females. Take a look, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So God is our maker. That maker created males and females. Point number three, then he commanded them to reproduce. By the way, very first command that is given to man, be fruitful and multiply. Point number four, look at Genesis chapter 2 for just a moment. God is our maker. He made males and females. He commanded them to reproduce. Then we turn the page to Genesis chapter 2 and we see him actually defining, getting into the creation of man and woman. So Genesis chapter 2, 21 through 24, we discover some of the details of how he created them, developing their roles, and ultimately establishing the family. Next, we see Jesus spoke of the creation of man and woman. In fact, when he's asked about marriage, he goes all the way back and he's pulling from Genesis chapter 2. And he says this, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. So all throughout the Bible, here's what I see. The Bible only uses words like males, female, to describe human beings. It still operates within the binary category of men and women. Now, here's what they would say. They would say, okay, yeah, we agree there's two biological sexes, male and female. But your gender is fluid. It's what you feel. And so according to them, sex is what is between your legs. Gender is what is between your ears. And so if I say that I feel like a woman, according to them, I'm a woman. Well, folks, again, if I stand up in front of you and tell you I'm an 87-year-old, 5'4" Jamaican woman, I think most of you in this room realize that's not the case. This is a beautiful soul right here. I actually have had several Bible studies with her. Cannot physically wait to get back to that country to sit down with her again. I know this will surprise you. I'm not a 5'4", 80-something-year-old Jamaican woman. Just because I say it doesn't make it true. But in their mind, it does. Again, open your Bible back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and let's look at something. Genesis chapter 1, we find the Bible specifying biological sex. Males, females. God made them male and female. By the way, we should put a little pause right here and ask this question. Can evolution explain how males and females came into existence? I know what the story is because I had to take it for classes. The story is that everything started out reproducing asexually, meaning you got this single-celled creature, it decides it wants a friend, so bloop, it splits, now you got two. And the story they paint is this: we needed more genetic diversity. And so this thing that basically went like bloop, to reproduce decided to evolve a separate male and female. Consider for just a moment, it would have to do that, evolve all the parts necessary, all the while still being able to reproduce asexually, right? Because until everything's in place, it doesn't work. By the way, you're missing one part, you got problems. You have to evolve both the internal and external anatomy. You also have to evolve all of the hormones necessary, the nerves, the muscles, everything to go along with it. And you have to be able to evolve that at the same time in the same location, and they have to like each other. And yet, they can't even explain males and females. Genesis 1 defines biological sex. Genesis 2 goes into gender and the specific roles. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 22. This is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Here's what I want you to see. When somebody reads Genesis 1 and 2, the logical conclusion is that the male of Genesis 1 is equal to the man of Genesis 2. The female of Genesis 1 is equal to the woman of Genesis chapter 2. Last point, God established roles for men and women. And ultimately, what all this gender neutrality is doing, it's abolishing the God-given roles that he gave us. If you look through scripture, Titus chapter 2, 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Timothy chapter 2, Genesis 3, Ephesians chapter 5, you find over and over God giving specific commands to fathers, to mothers, to women, to men. Well, folks, if we make everything gender neutral, you just threw all that out the window. And if you don't think that this is coming to the church, please wake up. We're already having discussions about what do you do if somebody is born a woman, transitions to be a male, and then wants to be an elder in the church. As much as the mainstream media and academia would have us think otherwise, the Bible believes in the organic unity of biological sex and gender. This is why male and female are uniquely the type of pair that can reproduce as commanded in Genesis 1. What's happening is they're positioning this argument to make folks who don't accept it to be the hate mongers, to be evil. Well, let me give you a little wake-up call. You know what the end result of most young people who have sex change surgery is? It is suicide. Now think about that. Which one is actually more loving? Somebody that's quick to pick up a scalpel and do a double mastectomy to a 14-year-old girl, or somebody who says, wait, we should not be doing that to a child, especially knowing that she's trying to fill a void in her life, and she's going to wake up one day with scars all over her body, permanent scars that she can't go back and fix, and realize she's still got a void there. By the way, if you really want to fill that void, it's Jesus Christ that can fill it. Not pills, not scalpels, not hormones. They are giving hormone therapy to 14, 15, 16-year-old people that's completely destroying their ability to reproduce later on. And yet we're supposed to think that that's good? Folks, it's not good. Woe to those, the text says, who call evil good and good evil. And yet, again, this is being promoted as good to our children. A lot of people think, well, the way to fix this is we need more laws. We need the right person in government. And other people would say, no, what we got to do, we got to bring prayer back in school, and we got to fix it that way. Folks, if we're going to fix it, we got to start in the home. Because ultimately, that's the solution to the whole thing. We've got to rebuild the family the way God intended. And I have to train up my children to understand what was God's original plan. One man, one woman for life. A male leaves his father and his mother, is joined to his wife. You see, if I were Satan and I wanted to destroy a country, or let's say I wanted to destroy this particular island, I wouldn't go to the government. I wouldn't go to Washington, D.C. or your state capital. I'd start with fathers. And I would convince fathers, look, you don't have any business worrying about the spiritual welfare of your children. All you need to do is make money. You go out, work 40 hours a week, pick up a remote control, come home, sit in your recliner, you're done. Because if I can do that, then I've already got most of the children. I would then turn my attention to the wives and I would say, look, what you need to do is you need to pawn your children off on everybody else and go pursue an independent career. Do everything you can to not raise your children. Then I would go after grandparents. And I would basically tell grandparents the only responsibility you have is to spoil your grandchildren physically. Don't you worry about the spiritual well-being of your grandchild. I then turn my attention to teenagers. And I would say, you know, when you hit 14 or 15, your job is to basically rebel against your parents. In fact, your job is to rebel against all authority. And then I would make sure everybody felt like they were good. And if I do that, I've got the country or the island or the city. Do you realize that a baby born today has a very real chance of seeing the demise of the church in the United States? Now, let me make sure you hear what I didn't say. I didn't say the church is going to be in demise during its lifetime, because we know, according to Scripture, the church is going to go on until Jesus comes back. Amen? But we're not guaranteed it's going to be strong here. In fact, it could be just a remnant. You say, but Brad, why would you say that a child born today might see the end of it in America? Well, let's put some numbers with it. Let's flesh it out. About every 3 years, there's an organization called 21st Century Christian. They put out a directory of churches of Christ. As of 2006, there was 1.24 million members of the Lord's church in the United States of America, 1.24. Now, I would point out that's Sunday morning only members. By 2009, we dropped to 1.20. 2012, 1.18. 2015, we're sitting at 1.15. 2020, 1.09. Anybody see a trend? Folks, we're losing on average 10,894 members of the Lord's body every single year. And that's pre-COVID, by the way. I think the numbers we see next time are going to be a whole lot lower. That means we're losing on average about 29.8 members of the church every single day. I'm going to be with you for 3 days. Do the math. You say, okay, but Brad, why would you say a child born today could see the demise of the church during their lifetime? Well, just do the math. As of 2020, we were sitting at 1.09 million. But we know that we're losing, on average, 10,894 members per year. Folks, you do the math. And unless we do something, we're going to be down to 0 in 100.4 years. How in the world could that happen? I think maybe part of it is because we have baptized our children, and instead of them putting on the new man and taking up their cross and following him, they view getting wet as being the end-all solution, and they go right back out to living in the world. And they think that church is just something we do once or twice a week, kind of like checking off a box. Oh, I did church today. Well, folks, nowhere in Scripture do I read Jesus saying we need to just check off a box and do church. I see and read about living a Christian life. And we've got to communicate that to our kids. Turn over to Psalm chapter 78 with me. Psalm chapter 78. Starting in verse 5, I want to read to you two groups of people. I want to see if you can notice a difference. Verse 5, for he established a testimony in Jacob. He appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them. The children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. So you got this one generation who they're talking about teaching children yet to be born the commandments of God. But then skip down and look with me, starting in verse 9, at the children of Ephraim, who the text says, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in his law. They forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. Two totally different groups. You got one group that is coming into battle and they're telling children yet to be born. Then you got another group, when they come into battle, they just lay down their bows. And the question is, what are we raising up our children for? You know, we're really good at teaching allegiance to our children about certain things. Ball teams. There's some of you in this room that you can remember your parents, maybe your dad talking to you about a certain ball team, and one maybe that he hated. Oh, he couldn't stand. And that has gotten so ingrained in you that now you're passing it on to your children. I live in the state of Tennessee. There is a certain football team that we will not name that lives to the south of Tennessee. They wear crimson, and it really bothers me. And I'm proud that my children don't like that crimson team either. Here's the question. Am I teaching my children an allegiance and a fidelity to God with the same passion and the same determination that I'm teaching them these other things? There's some of you in here, if I gave you a Dodge truck, you would sell it the next day. Some of you, you get a Ford or a Chevy and you're thinking, I would rather push a Toyota than drive that. Our kids know our allegiances, don't they? Right now, the current estimates show it takes 4 adults just to get one faithful child into the next generation. That's 2 sets of parents, 4 to get one. Help me understand why that's acceptable to anybody. I promise you, if this were in the business world, there's not a Christian businessman in the world that would allow those kind of failure rates. Well, so my question is, why do we allow it in the church today? Please understand, all of this is about the home. We're not doing the job that we should be at home. And I think part of it is not by accident. And I'm going to read to you a quote before I open it up for your questions. This is from a lady by the name of Linda Gordon. And I want to point out, I actually communicated with her because I wanted to make sure I was not misquoting her. She's a history professor at New York University. Listen to what she said. The nuclear family must be destroyed, and people must find better ways of living together. Whatever its ultimate meaning, the breakup of families now is an objectively revolutionary process. No woman should have to deny herself of any opportunities because of her special responsibilities to her children. Families will finally be destroyed only when a revolutionary social and economic organization permits people's needs for love and security to be met in ways that do not impose divisions of labor or any external roles at all. In other words, we want to break up your family. Folks, please understand, all of this gender confusion, all of this stuff they're doing, they have a battle plan. They have a blueprint. And they're coming for your children in mind. And if we don't take the time to train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord and to make sure they understand from a biblical perspective, what does marriage look like? What does the family look like? What am I called to do as a husband or a father? What is my role? If they don't get that, they're going to be in that 4-to-1 statistic. I'm going to pause right here because I told Lima I would open it up for some comments, some questions after each lesson. Floor is yours. You guys kind of know the drill from last night. What kind of questions, thoughts, comments do you have? Yes, sir. Great question. So he said, people who are practicing homosexuality, are those folks who we should evangelize? And the answer is absolutely. They have a soul. And everybody that has a soul, God desires all men to be saved. Amen. And even though sometimes we categorize certain things mentally as being worse than others, the reality is everybody in this room, including myself, probably chief right here, everybody has sinned. Now, maybe mine is not homosexuality. Maybe mine is something else. But at the end of the day, we all need the gospel, the truth. So here's where we are with that. Can someone who claims to be homosexual be a Christian? Well, to answer that question, I would say, can an alcoholic that doesn't practice be a Christian? Yeah, somebody that realizes I need to put the drink down. I don't need that in. I don't need to work in a bar. Same thing with homosexuality. Can somebody who once did that be forgiven of the sin and no longer practice the sin? Absolutely. And so I do feel like that is an area where we need to probably grow in our love and understanding. Again, they have positioned it to where we're the bad guys and that they have this wonderful thing on love. Well, folks, if we know that a behavior is going to lead somebody to an eternity of hell and we don't speak up, is that really loving? I don't think so. Good question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Brad. I do appreciate this discussion. I just want to kind of touch a little bit on what you had a comment last night about what has changed, and I see changes definitely. We've got different generations. We've got the X, the Y generation, the Z, the millennials, right? And for me, I came from the generations of the post-war time.
Baby boomers.
Baby boomers, that's right. But what I kind of see is, we're at fault at this too, because one thing that we've done is we've made things, we gave our kids, our children, things that we never had, right? We made life a little bit easier for them. We catered to them a lot. And I think part of it is because, we didn't have a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. So the things about our kids nowadays is the expectations. The expectations, the standards of what they have is different from what I grew up with.
Absolutely.
Right? You and I think maybe about the same age. So we've got that difference of what people have today. I can recall was, hey, you know what? You did something wrong. Go out, go find your stick.
Yep. There were no participation trophies
right.
given out when we played ball. You
So,
either won or you lost. And guess what? If you lost, you wanted to fight harder. You wanted to win the next time. So you went out and trained more. You practiced more. Today, everybody gets a trophy.
That's right. But I think what's also happened is I see sometimes the culture what we were having is a comfort culture, right? Mm-hmm. It's easier to go with the flow. It's easier. It's the why. Why do we do this and why do we do that? And I think we're at fault. I know Absolutely. I'm partially at fault of this.
Yep.
But coming back to, I guess my point is, it's hard. It's hard to do the right thing. It's definitely, and I see it in business, right? The right thing is not necessarily the easy way to do things. And what my perspective is it's the hard. Absolutely. To do right is hard. Is a harder way. And I've also want to admit too is you mentioned we lose kids during our college years. I was one of them. I went away to college. I had about I think 5-7 years of absence, and I think my dad kind of said, "Hey, you gotta have this heart-to-heart talk." So he told you gotta come back. Gotta come back. So I came back, and I think started regrowing again. But I think what I felt from my experience was that is being a Christian is hard.
Yep.
You got to work at it.
Absolutely.
You're fighting against every temptation that's out there, right? And the part about it is that I was always taught, hey, you're gonna bear your own cross.
Yep.
And I kind of want to leave that with you.
Let me give an example that I'm sure some of you probably heard, definitely can all relate to. If you think of Christian life, he used the word comfort. We've gotten comfortable. Is it like a cruise ship? Do you mentally think of being a Christian like being on a cruise ship that you see out here? I personally have never been on one, but I've been told that some of them are pretty nice. You got buffets for miles and, everything waiting up. Or do you view your Christian life like being on a battleship? Because Satan is real and he's coming after our children. And if we're stuck in a cruise ship mentality, then there's a good chance that our children's souls will be the next casualty. Yes.
When you said you spoke to Linda Gordon of NYU,
Yes.
and I'm wondering, I think I know the answer, but I'm wondering, did you happen to ask her about what kind of family she grew up in and what her church background was?
I did not. I will maybe reach out to her now that you said that and politely smack me across the face that I should have. I mean, that's an obvious follow-up. I'll be honest with you. I was so struck by her response of saying, absolutely, I said it. I stick by it. And I'm glad I said it. It needed to be said, that I was like, wow. Somebody that's that brazen that we want to destroy the family. So good, very, very good question. I'll do a little follow-up. She may shut me down at this point, but I will at least reach out. Yes.
Same-sex marriages and all that was rampant even in the time of Jesus, and it has gone
Yep.
uncontrolled up to this day because of the educational system that we have, and it starts from the schools early on in life.
Absolutely.
So what can we do as Christians?
So one of the things that I try to teach people when I talk about that particular issue is we first got to boil it down and ask, is it genetic or is it a choice? I can prove to you scientifically it's not genetic, which means it's a choice. So then we got to ask, is it a choice that God is okay with? Because a lot of times you guys hear people say, oh, but if they love each other and it's consensual, then who are we to interfere with that? Okay, before I let you hijack the word love, please understand the Bible describes God as love. It says God is love in 1 John, right? So if God is love, then I got to go back and I got to read and see where, if I really love God, I will keep his commands. Okay. What does the Bible say in the patriarchal age about this abomination? It says that it was an abomination, so much so that God rained down fire and brimstone. There's a place on the planet where there's several inches of sulfur. All right, fast forward to the Mosaic age. Did he change his mind? Did he suddenly get soft and say, okay, I'm going to allow that? No. Take a look. Leviticus, for instance. All right. What about Jesus' time? First question we should ask is, did Jesus violate Jewish law and say that it was now acceptable? No, not at all. Is there any New Testament teachings about same-sex relations? Oh yeah, 1 Corinthians 6, Romans, over and over again. What's interesting to me, a lot of people are claiming, hey, it's genetic, it's genetic. You realize 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul lists out a whole bunch of sins, some of which is sodomy or homosexuality. And he uses this phrase, thus were some of you. Meaning they had what? They changed. If it's genetic, you don't change. So the very first thing we have to do, I think, is we have to reposition the argument, because they're making us view to be the hate mongers. Oh, you're not very tolerant. You're not very loving. You don't love these people. Absolutely love them. I want them to go to heaven. And part of the reason it troubles me is because the picture of marriage is used between Christ and the church. And if we're allowing a perversion to happen here and legalize it between two men or two women, what about this picture between Christ and his bride? To answer your question more fully, Christians need to find their voice again. We need to do it lovingly, but we need to preach the truth in love. We haven't done that very well in the last 30 or 40 years. What we've done is we've remained silent. We've allowed the other side to have all the time in the spotlight and to get their views across. And so now a lot of our neighbors are posting signs in their yard saying, love is love. No, God is love. And we need to feel comfortable politely correcting and promoting people in the right direction. One of the things that when I teach on homosexuality, period, one of the points that I make is this: it actually has been shown to reduce lifespans by 20.6 years. So practicing that lifestyle cuts your life down more than cigarette smoking. If I set this aside, if I took the Bible and said, we're not even going to open that, just for the whole reason of cutting lifespans by 20 years, why in the world would we want to promote that or encourage that? Yes, sir.
Brother, let's say, what if the case, what's your opinion on, what if the case was that there was found a gene? That would still not negate the need to obey
Absolutely.
our Father.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I know of the 3 studies that were really touted back in the 90s that planted the idea that it was a gene. And let me point out to you why they're wanting it to be a gene. In order for something to be a civil right, you have to come from a minority group. 3 points. Number 1, minority group. Number 2, helpless to defend your cause. And number 3, you have to be born that way. You have to have all 3 of those in order for something to be a true civil rights issue. If number 3 is not there, guess what? It's not a civil right, which means, again, it's a choice, sodomy being a choice. And so we got to ask the question, is that really a choice? He said, if it were a gene, it doesn't negate the fact that God gave commands. And that, I mean, folks, there's a lot of sin out there that people enjoy and want to do that they can convert away from and live a Christian life. Homosexuality is just one of them. There's people that are greedy, covetous, liars, fornicators, adulterers, all these things. Can they get away from that and live a Christian life? Absolutely. Good point. All right, we're ready for about a 10-minute break, 10, 15-minute break. Let you guys get up, stretch your legs, get some water, and then we're going to come right back and look at why do I, as a scientist, choose to believe the Bible. Appreciate your attention.